We have, okay, great. We have 52 people currently in the meeting. This is the initial session for Games Beyond Entertainment, which is a track I'll be chairing from now until the end of the conference. I come from the Institute of Digital Games at the University of Malta, and I see a lot of known faces with Marcello, Phil, Isabel, Rafa, and a lot of many others. I need to be very quick. We have 4 presentations, 2 of which are full papers and 2 are short papers. And a couple of you have videos instead of talks. Let me encourage the public to use the webcam and to raise their hands in case they want to ask questions about the talk. In general, there's going to be 2 or 3 minutes, which is not a lot after the end of the presentation to ask questions. So we can take it onto Discord in case the matter requires further discussion. I will announce the start of the first presentation, which is called Curio 2.0, a local network multiplayer game kit to encourage inquisitive mindset. I see that in the room we have both Marcello and Isabel. This is a paper that is developed as a consortium of Maltese, Swedish, and Dutch universities. Marcello, the floor is yours. Have fun.
Well, I hope the floor is ours because this will be a presentation given by both Marcello and Isabel.
Well, yours can be plural, right? Yeah.
And Isabel, can you share your screen at this point?
I wanted to, and then I noticed that my Zoom has not gotten the right permission, so that's great.
Well, that is also 2020. So we will soon see the presentation slides. As Stefano already introduced. As Stefano already introduced, this is a project that is a collaboration between multiple universities. And the project itself is essentially to create a designed or like a game-based toolkit that lecturers, that teachers in school settings can use in order to structure the education of children aged around 8 to 12 years was the beginning of the proposal. I hope that soon we have lectures, slides, because it's always a little bit nicer to also point at the visuals. Thank you, that will be it. No. And the first slide comes in a second. Maybe more than a second. Isabel, I don't think you're not like you can be heard at the moment. Okay, that's I hear you. Do I not hear you?
Marcello, if we can be of service, let us know what you need.
I don't think we needed anything until we figured out that apparently there's something not completely working. That's always a bit of a shame. So what I will suggest is, I'm not quite sure. Does Isabel have less rights than me at the moment in the room?
So, okay, I was trying to share, but you didn't see it. Can you hear me now at least?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, that's one step.
Yeah, now I can hear you and see.
And see the slide?
Yeah, but it's on the last slide at the moment.
That is not a great start.
That's all right.
What? Okay, I'm going to do this differently. Because I don't think it's liking the keynote sharing.
That's one thing.
So give me 1 second.
No worries.
Sorry for this.
I think I'm going to talk a little bit already before until, so we promised there's going to a little bit of actually showing about the game because it's quite interesting to see this part as well. But essentially the start of the project is very much coming from a perspective of there's a lot of educational games that are being created and developed for children, for children in school age, meaning that there's games that are meant to be played in a way that by playing this game, you learn something about a specific kind of content, right? What in this project we wanted to do is to create a toolkit or a game kit that supports teachers in structuring their lectures. So on some level, it is actually closer to creating something that helps teachers create a playful kind of situation for their students. on some level, of course, the goal is that it's for students, but it's kind of through a sneaky way in. The sneaky way being like, once you get lecturers to actually play games in the classroom, you will have an easier time to actually introduce a gameful and gameplay in classes. And here we have the first slide, and I think for just in the interest of time, we will jump for the spoilers into the project goals. So the way how to think about it is really that we really are interested kind of as a lecturer, as a kind of a game master, as it were, in a very traditional kind of sense of role-playing games, as someone who is managing experience and the playful scenario and the way how it's being used in the classroom really comes from how the lecturer is using it. Now that comes with a couple of caveats that we're going to talk about still, but essentially the challenge is here that this is not a game that is click and run in the sense of set up your students and they will educate themselves, as it were, with this game. It is a structure in which it is possible to create the situations in which asking questions, in which approaching a new educational topic is becoming easier perhaps, or at the very least has a playful kind of character. So it does similar, and that's why we're coming to this kind of understanding of the game master or the lecturer as a game master. It needs the teacher as an active participant in game and play. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Isabel for the next slide.
Hopefully without problems. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, so what is Curio exactly? So Mara gave an introduction, and the idea is to have something that encourages inquisitive mindset, as says in the title, but what does that look like? So this is the student side of the Curio game. It is an asynchronous game, so to say. So the teacher is an active participant as well, but this is what the students see, which is the most game-like aspect of the project. And it starts with, in the top left, students signing in. They get assigned to a team. There is red, blue, and yellow. And they are a crew on a spaceship exploring a galaxy. And the galaxy you see up there as well. And this galaxy is populated by planets, which are, each of them has a subtopic associated to them. So this is something set up by the teacher. And every Curio session will be based on a certain educational topic that they are introducing or discussing in the class at that time. And they have several subtopics related to this topic. Then students vote with their team to which planet they want to visit. And when they go into the planet, they will meet one of the planet inhabitants. Now, the planet inhabitant has been, or the planet has been drained of curiosity by the antagonist of the game, which is the haze of confusion, which you can see also in the top left. It sweeps over the galaxy and wipes away all curiosity. And how do students then try to like re-trigger this curiosity in the inhabitant is by asking questions about the subtopic of that planet. Then they do that for a certain amount of time. Then there is a phase in which they can see the questions that were asked while the teacher still goes through the questions. So all the questions end up with the teacher, who can then evaluate them, whether they are useful questions to discuss, whether they're, students put thought into them or not. And they can accept or reject those questions. Students, while this happens, can see the questions that were asked, and then they see the resolution of that planet, which is usually the inhabitant is revitalized with, all these triggering questions that they were asked, and they will give a little bit of information about the subtopic to the students as a reward. So there's a little bit of learning a little bit of information about the subtopic at that point. This repeats several times, and then there's an end phase, and I will go through the structure in a little bit more detail. So every Curio game is made up of certain phases. So we have the setup, the beginning, then there are multiple game rounds, which is what I just described in voting for a subtopic, visiting the planet, answering or asking questions, and seeing the resolution. Once enough rounds have been passed, so enough planets have been visited, then there is the end game, which is the confrontation with the antagonist, and then there is the final wrap-up activity for the students to participate in. So this is that game route again. So again, voting, then you see the result of the vote. So whoever per team, whichever destination got the most votes, that is where that ship will go. And then they visit the planet, ask questions on that subtopic, and hopefully revitalize the planet and the inhabitant of the planet and get a bit of information. And once enough rounds have passed, then we go into the end game, where the ships go to the end of the map, where they will confront the haze of confusion. And the haze of confusion will ask them multiple choice questions based on the subtopics that were visited. So if the students manage to revitalize a particular planet, then they will have gotten the answer to this question already. So there's a little bit of a check in like whether students were paying attention, whether they've gotten that information. And then if they answer the question correctly, or if a majority in the team answer the question correctly, then they will charge the antagonist and defeat him after 3 questions have been asked and answered. And then as a little wrap-up activity, the students get to decorate their joint ship using stickers, and based on the amount of questions that they asked that were accepted by the teacher, they have a certain amount of points to spend individually, and they will see, they can put drone stickers onto the ship, but also see the stickers of other students. So the idea is that you can also take a print screen of this and print it out, maybe have it as a memento of that particular Curio session. And that wraps up a whole Curio session. Back to you, Maro.
So in the interest of time, to make up a little bit for it, I'm going to keep it a little bit short. But essentially what you see here is then the teacher side, which looks maybe a little bit less playful from a visual perspective, but is a somewhat bit more organized around the idea of organization, keeping an idea of what is happening in different student teams, and having, for example, from different groups, screenshots being shared of what is currently happening, but with a goal on keeping a big picture of the entire classroom rather than individual students. So this is kind of the interface on the back side. You can find more information in the full paper, but essentially as on the teacher side, similar to, again, to this kind of mentality of a game master in a role-playing game, it is important that they have the information they need in order to structure the play as it continues. Next slide, please. Yeah. One of the most important part here that I want to stress, and it's also what the title of this paper is rather long, is because one of the things in which this project stands out is its ability to deal with multiplayer components without the internet. And that has partly to do with the fact that a lot of different schools have very complex kind of internal network setups, right? And this is one of the issues, that there's a lot of projects and products out there that are maybe providing certain kind of functionality that our project does not address, but often comes with the caveat that you need administrators or more maintenance happening in order to keep that going. What we specifically focus on here is that all functionality is driven from a teaching computer, and all students in a classroom essentially connect locally to the teaching computer, which can of course happen via Wi-Fi. That is not to say that there's not more technical issues than that can happen, but at the very least, the infrastructure necessary to run these kind of game sessions is vastly reduced to larger multiplayer setups. I think that's okay.
Marcello, your conclusion, please.
Yes. So Isabel, can you step further?
So we ran a pilot study. It was great. Generally positive reception. We noticed definitely a change in how people asked questions from the beginning, students towards the end, fitting well with project-based teaching efforts. We had a competitive element in there, which I want to stress is it worked for the winners. It did not work for the losers. Something to keep in mind. So we actually reduced that and made it more of a collaborative experience. And also it's important to keep a balance between students of different age and skill levels when they're put together in teams, is what we did for our pilot. Of course, if students are individual, then this is less of an issue. And since we need to wrap up, I will refer to the paper for some guidelines that we formed in terms of how a project like Curio can be used in the classroom. We have some rules there for teachers. And primarily what I want to, as a final giveaway, is that something like Curio, we think, based on the limited data we have, can work very well for inciting critical thinking, asking questions. However, it is very much reliant on the teacher willing to put in the time and effort to use it as a proper tool that can enhance their classroom, rather than expecting that the game is just there and can be used as a reward mechanic, for instance, at the end of a class, or something that students do on their own. And I think with that, we will wrap it up. We're happy to talk to anyone in Discord afterwards, unfortunately. Time-wise, we didn't
maybe answer a very quick question. Can the student lose in the game, asks Henry Bomstrom.
I have seen the question. I have seen it. Very shortly, question to the chair. This was supposed to be, how many minutes do we have for the presentation in general?
It was supposed to be 15, including questions and answers.
We are 13 minutes since the start at the moment, keeping time. So can students lose in the game? They cannot necessarily lose. You can essentially go ahead in terms of your other students, your other teams. What happens in the end is that if there is less performance, it means you have less stickers in the game that you can decorate. So we were quite careful with what it means to frame. On the other hand, the way how it was designed was also that teachers in early focus group sessions did put a great emphasis on also wanting to be able to reward and having a certain kind of ability to emphasize the students that are actively participating. So we're trying to de-emphasize losing, let's put it like this, while still having an emphasis on there being something to the fact that you have participated actively.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marcello. Consider that technical problems also feature into this because we have a keynote coming up. So absolutely. I cannot leave any discounts.
Thank you very much.
To the two of you and to all the team behind Curio. We are moving on to the next session, which is, I think the speaker should be, actually it's a video, but it's by Phil Lopes, who was a former PhD student here at the Institute of Digital Games, University of Malta. It's a full paper titled Towards Designing Games for Experimental Protocols, Investigating Human-Based Phenomena. Phil, or rather Artificial Phil, please take over.
Hi everyone, my name is Phil Lopez and I am from the IIG lab of the EPFL, and I am here today to talk about designing games for experimental protocols with the objective of studying human-based behavior. And the idea of using games as an experimental task for the study of human-based phenomena has become increasingly popular over the past couple of years, where a lot of experimenters have been using games to study human phenomena such as emotion, how humans learn, the specific human types of behaviors, or exploring the effectiveness of, for example, rehabilitation treatments that use games to motivate players to go to rehabilitation sessions, for example. Just to make this paper kind of more contextualized, the focus here is specifically on studying human-based behaviors through the collection of human physiology. So meaning that the experiments that we're kind of targeting here that use games are the ones that use first games as an experimental task, obviously, with the objective of collecting human-based physiology for the study of certain specific types of human behaviors. And this can include skin conductance, heart rate, and muscle movement, brain activity, for example. So one of the first questions you might ask is, why should we even use games at all? Given that games can really remove some of the control from the experimenter, given that the pacing is often then given to the participant, which kind of complicates the timing of the data collection, given that games, depending on its complexity, can present a lot of variables that are difficult to keep track of and can influence, obviously, physiological signals. And actually just creating a game itself can be quite time-consuming in itself. The fact is that sometimes the benefits of using a game can outweigh these downsides. And this obviously really depends on the type of behavior that the experimenter wants to explore, as certain behaviors can only occur if a degree of engagement is given to the participant. And this illusion of choice, of being able to control the experiment, and the idea of failure or success can really increase the investment on part of the players and allow to evoke certain behaviors that, for example, a very rigid experimental task cannot accomplish. More so, I believe that a lot of the limitations derives specifically from the human physiological aspect and not the game itself when we're thinking about games as an experimental task. The reason why I'm saying this is that we can always change, design, and modify games to our specific needs and desires, while we can't do that with physiological reactions. So one of the first things to consider when developing a game for an experimental task is to understand the stimulus response window of the specific physiological signal that we're going to collect. And the stimulus response window is basically the time since the stimuli was triggered until we observe a response in the physiological signal. And the reason why this is important is that this time frame or this time window can vary substantially between the different types of physiology. So for example, heart rate, fMRI present very different types of stimulus response windows. Another important facet to explore, which is, in my opinion, rarely taken into account also in literature, is the idea of letting the participant wind down back to the baseline value, meaning this Tn, which is going back to normal. So one of the concepts that I've been experimenting in my current project is the idea of block play design, which is heavily inspired by a lot of fMRI experiments that tend to use games, actually. And the idea is to kind of design games around the idea of the time that it takes for the stimulus to trigger and until the time that the player reacts and the wind out time. So each block is timed around these very specific time frames, where additionally to this, each block is accompanied by a baseline value and also a very quick questionnaire. So the reason why you might want to do this is that, first of all, it provides a way to try to analyze the entire signal from start to finish, by providing a wind down time for the participant. It also allows us to mitigate the potential of overlapping signals. For example, if we're stimulating the player at a very high frequency, it might mean that we will have signals that are overlapping each other and might be quite difficult to untangle in processing, meaning that this experiment will be unusable. Furthermore, by asking for a constant baseline, we can always normalize each block accordingly. And also, given that we're always asking for a questionnaire at the end, we can always then compare each block between each other. Although you might already tell me that a lot of the experiments that you made are using block design. From the literature that I've seen, the problematic thing to me is that the time frame of each block is usually randomly chosen, right? So sometimes I've seen experiments where players just play 5 minutes of each block and let them, let's say, roam free in the virtual world and, let's say, expect that a stimuli will trigger. And it might trigger, but it might cause this overlapping situation, for example. Another factor to consider are the movement and posture limitations that may arise when using certain types of physiological recording devices, particularly if using electrode-based devices such as electrocardiograms or EEGs. We can expect that the participant will be tethered and wired to a specific recording device. Now, these recording devices can be either wireless or wired, meaning that they're either attached to a computer or not, but the electrodes that attach to these devices are often wired and can lead to a lot of movement constraints in particular. On the other side, for fMRI, for example, even though the player doesn't have to have electrodes attached to his body, they have to play in a practical posture. More precisely, they have to be lying down and facing upwards, where they are then attached to a table so that they can move, or else it will ruin the scan. and they have to play in that specific position, meaning that they can't really see the controllers, and they have to be looking upwards to a mirror that reflects to a television screen behind the fMRI machine. So the reason why this is important to consider is that this type of constraint may have unwanted side effects. Obviously, the most obvious one is the noise artifacts that may appear in the data, but these can often be mitigated through signal processing techniques. Other factors is the limited movement. Although we can potentially create games around these limited movements, we have to consider that if we make games that are overly physical and we're constraining these players, it may unintentionally frustrate them or may actually unwillingly disconnect wires while they're playing. So it is something to consider. If we're using VR, another important consideration is the cyber sickness factor, meaning that if a player feels sick during the experiment, it will obviously influence the physiological signal. So there's not really a lot of magic we can do here. As I said, we can design games that factor in less input complexity on part of the player, and also simplifies physical movement to the positions of the body where the electrodes are not abundant. So trying to place the interaction and the body movement outside of the constrained area of where all the wires are. For posture, there are some methods that exist that can help mitigate the sickness. For example, the simulator sickness questionnaire can allow the experimenter to gauge the amount of sickness that the participant is feeling. And more recently, me and my colleagues have been looking at ways to mitigate cyber sickness through the illusion of actually using the posture into the game itself, such as if you're lying down, you're actually looking at the ceiling of the specific environment, and this actually helps reduce cyber sickness levels. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of the factors that I explained in the paper. However, I would just like to give some final comments. So the main point of this paper is not about offering the perfect solution and coming up with the best design for a game of this type, but it's mostly about raising a bit the awareness of this problem and kind of opening the door a little bit to the potential of game design or game design solutions for these specific tasks in the experiments. So a lot of what I've explained here today may seem obvious, but you would be surprised by the amount of papers that exist that had to rely exclusively on questionnaires, discarding their physiological data simply because they didn't control the pacing of the game and the specific variables of the game. So this is an actual problem that exists in the community, and the point of this paper, as I said before, is really to try and bring the game design discussion as a way to potentially solve these problems and salvage hours of experimental time and potentially money. So before I leave, I would just like to thank all the artists that are in the slide for providing the nice artwork icons that I shown during this presentation. And I would like to thank everybody for their time and their attention, and I will be around to answer any questions that may arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Do we have questions? I don't see questions in the chat. So any last takers?
There's someone with his hand raised, I think.
I don't see it. Can you tell me who?
Marius?
Marius, if you can unmute yourself and ask a question directly, please.
Thank you, Phil, for the presentation. I actually had a question about the baseline part. In your experience, what is the length of baseline? And also, is there a specific stimulus or something that you show, that you should show to the subject during that baseline?
So the baseline collection really depends on physiology. Usually, in my experience, if I'm using GSR or skin conductance, I've done baselines for about 20 seconds, if I remember, or 30 seconds. For example, more recently, I've been working with electrogastrography, which is EGG, and that is extremely slow. So baseline, for example, for that is like 15 minutes. So it can vary a lot between the different types of physiology. So to do that, you really need to know, the literature of that specific physiological type. In terms of stimuli, if you're thinking about like doing the block design that I suggested, so the way that we've been approaching, so I've been working with the University of Geneva on this fMRI project, and the way that we've been approaching it is to have these very like small blocks with the intention of evoking a specific experience. So a block where the idea is to evoke, let's say, frustration. Another block which is to evoke, ideally, some kind of calm. What was the other one? Pride. These kinds of things, and see. But in order for you to actually know if that really happens, you really need to pilot it beforehand and see if the data that you get actually, evokes those kinds of situations. But I mean, it's very, let's say, solution specific, right? So there's not really like if you do this, it's going to work all the time.
My main worry is that the
Marius,
transition...
I need to stop you here because we're running out of time. It is great that you have questions. You can continue to ask them directly to the author, but for the sake
I'll be on Discord if you all need to.
Yep.
So
thank you, Phil. Thank you, Marius. Congratulations. The third speaker for today is Stamatia Savvani, and she is presenting live a short paper this time called Formalizing Casual Tabletop Games for Language Teaching. I hope, Stamatia, that you can take over and show your screen and start your presentation as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for this introduction. Just to make sure that I can be heard and that you can see my presentation. Okay, so I'm Stamatia, and I'm presenting my paper, Formalizing Casual Tabletop Games for Language Teaching. First, I'll talk about different approaches to gameful language teaching and teachers' practices towards them. I will present also 3 different types of commercial games, storytelling, role-playing games, and word games, and how they could be aligned to meet specific learning objectives. So the first big question is why apply commercial games for language education? There are 3 approaches. The first one being game-informed, aka gamification, which employs game elements in non-game contexts. In the picture here, you can see a snippet from an ebook, an English language textbook. As you can see, the players, all they have to do here is answer the questions by clicking the right answer. It's a behaviorist model, and it tests rather than help students / players practice their skills, and it solicits human-computer interaction. You don't have to produce any language in order to play this gamified quiz. So yeah, the next approach is game-enhanced language teaching, which refers to the use of commercial games. This can provide more authentic and meaningful experiences in the classroom as the players play and use language, the target language, in order to meet communicative goals. A lot of social interactions take place, and this can also be solicited in the third approach, game-based language teaching, with more emphasis on the exploratory and reflective side, as teachers are welcome to design their own experiences, game experiences, maybe with students as well. So what are teacher attitudes to gameful teaching? So far, games have been used mostly in language education as individual activities or as rewards at the end of lessons, as it was said earlier by Marcelo and Isabel, and thus they provide shallow engagement. But games have the potential to solicit more meaningful interactions, and teachers have seen that. Teachers have seen that gamification is limited, that it reinforces behaviorist models, so they have rejected it, especially in language education, because peer interactions are very limited and language production too. So what kind of commercial games can be applied in the classroom? Taking into consideration the context I'm familiar with, that is English as a foreign language to young learners with an elementary to intermediate level of proficiency, and the fact that classes last less than an hour, I employed an advanced search on the Board Game Geek website, and the criteria were party games that don't last long, less than half an hour, and that they are low in complexity. So the list returned many games, so I chose the top 6 ones. So casual games are usually defined by the easiness and low complexity of gaming experience, and that's why they were found suitable to use for the language classroom. And my analysis looked at game mechanics and how these games can be linked to practice grammar and vocabulary skills. So how can this be done? The first category of games are storytelling games. I include here Once Upon a Time and Storyline. Maybe you're familiar with them. They are card storytelling games, and players use the card to create a story. For language education, they can be used to teach part of speech, or narrative tenses, explore adjectives. And Storyline is much more structured than Once Upon a Time because it has 15 narrative cards that student players are asked to complete. The next category is role-playing games. Here I have Spyful and Fun Employed. They are role-playing card games, and players have to ask and answer questions to figure out locations, to convince the others about their skills. So questions are very important as a grammar aspect, and also vocabulary relates to professions, locations, work. The final category is word games, like Codenames and Taboo. I'll be happy to play Codenames with anyone later, or Spyful. So both are communication limit games, and they are team-based. There are a lot of metacognitive skills that are asked from learners' part in order to play these games, because they have to make connections with words, and also vocabulary-wise, they are very open to be adapted, which leads us to how these can be employed to online learning. Both Spyful and Codenames have non-official versions that can be solicited online. And the main advantage of those, as you can see in the picture, is that you can customize the content and adapt the game to your own vocabulary that you want to teach. For storytelling games, there are many apps that have the story cubes and creative and prompts that can help students create stories. Some final comments based on the above is that teachers need to be exposed to commercial games in order to realize games' potential and move away from gamification that they have already rejected. And it's good to work with teachers and help them introduce commercial games in the classroom, help them adapt those, and so that we can establish sound pedagogy around games. So I will end my presentation with a big question. How can the game industry and game researchers help in creating truly interactive lessons, not just by having a fancy and very interactive user interface, but also making the game an interactive experience in real life? So that's it from me, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Or maybe some answers. Maybe some people in the chat already have answers to these questions, or part of the answer. Congratulations, Stamatia. And do we have any answers, questions, comments about this presentation? No takers? Looks like you convinced everybody. Marcello, do you have any comments about this in relation to the fact that you were quoted during the talk? Do you think that there's something to be added here?
I think one reality of any kind of presentation in a session is that before and after, there's too many things that happen at the same time. So I'm looking forward to reading the paper in a bit more of a downtime moment.
And
I was very happy to hear this project, about this project.
Thank you, Marcello. Any final questions about this presentation? Do we have any more comments or ideas? Doesn't look like that. So I will take the liberty of introducing the fourth talk of this session. Is another short one, and it's a collaboration between Northwestern University and UC Santa Cruz. The presenters, in this case in video form, are David Bar-El and Katrine E. Ringland. The title of the talk is Crafting Game-Based Learning, an Analysis of Lessons for Minecraft Education Edition. Please start the video. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Bar-El, and I'll be presenting this work on behalf of myself and my colleague Katrine Ringland. Our late-breaking paper is titled Crafting Game-Based Learning, an Analysis of Lessons from Minecraft Education Edition. As games become ever more central in the lives of children and adults, understanding learning with games too becomes an important goal. Digital game-based learning is a growing approach of utilizing digital games as part of educational design and instruction. Meta-analyses show that digital game-based learning can lead to positive effects in terms of students' motivation, engagement, and learning outcomes. However, digital game-based learning should not only be thought of in terms of games as interventions having some sort of an effect on student outcomes. In our research, we focus on a slightly different dynamic, one which thinks of games within a complex relationship between technology, students, and teachers, with teachers acting as agents of integration and change. In this study, we examined the design work that teachers carry out to curate learning experiences with digital games. Drawing on Eggenfeld-Nielsen's work on the third generation of educational game use, we see how game design and research has shifted over the last few decades. The first generation focused on student behavior and direct learning. The second generation echoed the trends of cognitive science. This led to a focus on student thinking, perception, memory, and learning processes. The third generation focuses not only on the game itself or the learner, but on the entire educational context. This context includes technology, students, and the teacher. Research on teachers and digital game-based learning has focused primarily on surveys of factors that hinder or promote the integration of games into the classroom. While critical to increase participation in digital game-based learning, this leaves a gap in the literature regarding the actual practices of teachers who do choose to integrate digital games into their teaching. In this study, we asked, what learning experiences do teachers design with a sandbox game for classroom use? In our study, we looked at teachers' designs with Minecraft Education Edition. Minecraft is a highly popular gaming title with over 200 million units sold worldwide. Since its emergence in 2009, the game has been used for academic and educational uses. In 2016, Minecraft Education Edition was released as a dedicated game for classroom use. The The educational version maintains the core mechanics of Minecraft, with several changes geared towards instructional design and classroom management. In terms of our methods, we collected the full repository of lesson plans available on the Minecraft Education Edition website. When educators upload a lesson plan to the website, they check boxes to specify the subjects, skills, and target audience of the lesson. Moreover, they may upload supporting materials such as Minecraft worlds, worksheets, videos, and other resources. In terms of our analyses, they started with cleaning the dataset. We then conducted 2 passes through the data, one quantitative and the second qualitative. I conducted the first pass to generate descriptive statistics regarding user-generated content. Here we looked at frequency counts for numbers of lessons per author and the various info tags. We then started a second qualitative pass, while taking a grounded theory approach. We looked at every lesson by the 16 power users. We read their lesson plans and played through some of them. We coded the various dimensions along which the lessons converged or diverged and summarized the various teacher profiles. Our paper covers a set of findings. In today's talk, I will briefly discuss those that are highlighted in red. We invite you to read the full paper for more details. In terms of the authors, we found that 143 lessons were uploaded by the Minecraft Education admin account, which is why we excluded them, because they were not user-generated content. The remaining 236 authors accounted for 484 lessons. The distribution of the lessons was a right-tailed skewed distribution, with the median number of lessons being 1 and an average of 2. 16 authors fell above 1 standard deviation and contributed 33% of the total user-generated lessons, hence we call them the power users. We then looked at the student age tags and saw that the majority of lessons were designed for elementary and middle school students. Many lessons for those ages were also tagged as suitable for high school students. There were no lessons that were designed specifically for pre-K, and only 2 that were designed solely for adults. Looking at the subjects tag, we saw 25 possible tags. The frequency of the various tags point to a wide range of content which covers STEM, social sciences, and the humanities. However, some of the tags were kind of ambiguous, such as technology. Looking at the qualitative work, at the time of submitting our work in progress paper, we had identified 7 dimension codes. These included World Builder, which relates to whether or not teachers design their own Minecraft worlds to accompany the lesson. You can see here an example of one cool world. NPCs, which may have been used if teachers built worlds. We saw a variety of uses of NPCs, from serving as sources of information, to driving a narrative, to acting as interfaces for multiple choice questions. A third code that was interesting was external media, which relates to whether teachers included any media outside of Minecraft within the lesson plan. 2 examples of these are a PowerPoint lecture, which the students built alongside, or a worksheet that students were asked to fill out as they explored a dedicated Minecraft world. As we looked back and forth between the teacher profiles and our coding scheme, we started thinking about the ways in which the dimensions come together and result in different lesson designs. In the paper, we describe 3 teacher profiles. These can be thought of as lesson prototypes. The first one, a game within a game, is like sort of an RPG minigame that takes place entirely within the Minecraft world. The game as a lab or expedition invites students to explore a world as kind of a field trip. Students are asked to document structures, creatures, or the sort of digital natural world, so to speak, and to log or demonstrate their findings, sometimes in relation to the real world. Finally, a game for student representations is when the teacher does not build a world, but instead prompts the students, sometimes as an entire classroom, to build their own world in relation to a given lesson. To summarize, we analyzed 484 teacher-generated lessons from Minecraft Education Edition. Lessons were aimed at mostly 8 to 13-year-olds. Lessons spanned a variety of subjects. Our ongoing qualitative analysis of power users has led to 7 dimension codes. And as we keep thinking about these codes and refining them in our work, we really want to think about how can these different codes, these different dimensions, these different ways of designing lessons with a game come together to really design a variety of different lesson experiences for students. In terms of our future work, we have continued our qualitative analyses and are now refining our codes and illustration of dimension combinations. We plan to expand this work by surveying and interviewing teachers who have designed lessons with Minecraft Education Edition to better understand their thinking and design process. Finally, as digital games gain legitimacy as part of the teacher's toolkit, we believe that understanding what and how teachers design with games is an important area for researchers of games for learning. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, David. Very clear presentation, a lot of material in those short 10 minutes. So do we have questions concerning this educational use of Minecraft and the analysis that was just offered?
Should I just take one of the questions? So let's see if there's one in the chat.
Marcello has a question.
Yeah, one of my questions was, to what extent do you think this can, or the findings can be extrapolated to other games other than Minecraft? To the extent that, given that Minecraft is very easily shapeable into different shapes.
That's a really, really good question. And as I was watching the first presentation today, I was thinking about that as well. It's a really good question. I'm not sure exactly. I think one thing that I saw a lot in kind of research on games for education is that most teachers design kind of quiz type games, kind of puzzle games or very kind of multiple question games, which some of the lessons in Minecraft seem to be the same. Like literally some of the lessons were multiple choice questionnaires within Minecraft with different NPCs standing as the different answers. And I think in that case, it might translate in a similar way, although more kind of in the game in 3D. Where it might be more tricky is that really Minecraft is like this immersive experience within a game, more of like a virtual environment in some cases. And I'm not sure to what extent, other games are modifiable and the teachers kind of know how to modify. I mean, obviously if somebody's an expert gamer, they could do that with like RPG games. So it's a good question. And if anybody has ideas for other titles that might be similar, like Roblox or even Fortnite perhaps, that can create these kind of 3D immersive experiences, it would be interesting to see whether it does extrapolate or not, whether it's only limited to Minecraft, but I don't have a clear answer.
David, thank you for your answer. There's one question which you can take in just 1 minute. Adrian Galea asked, what was different about the power users on a qualitative basis?
Great question. So we didn't actually kind of qualitatively compare them to the non-power users. It would also be, we would have to sort of sample a bunch of people who only uploaded one lesson and see whether there's a difference. But just off the top of my head, we didn't observe any difference. The main reason why we chose those 16 users was because they accounted for a larger amount of lessons. And we kind of assumed that if somebody didn't upload only one lesson, they've developed some sort of expertise or maybe even a style. So it was kind of a statistical excuse for us to focus on a narrower set of lessons to then make us more acquainted with the data, rather than look at the entirety of the 627 lessons, which would have taken us a much longer time.
David, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all the speakers for having been very timely and very patient with this crazy format to avoid becoming too tired with these kind of meetings. Now, I would like Antonis to give a few closing remarks, and I thank you again. And tomorrow we have another session of Games Beyond Entertainment. Thank you very much.
All right, we will now move to room 1, where we will have the keynote. So we will resume. Room 2 will stay open on my browser apparently, and we will then resume the sessions at 5:30 or whatever 30 is in your location. Okay, thank you very much for attending, and hope to see you again.